Let's talk about what the World Health Organization is doing
or not doing,
basically continuing to lie to the American people and the world about what it's discovered in the Wuhan lab. So, of course, the Wuhan lab, when you do it, well, let's start this. When you do a Google search for where did COVID start, if you just go to Google and you're just like, hey, where did COVID start? Google actually has a curated section of Google's main page that explains where COVID started. So that's the Google search. It's a cluster of patients in Wuhan, in China, where it began to people there experienced shortnesses of breath and fever.
That's not really an answer to that question.
No, so it's
That's
not.
a geographic question, but okay.
So the WHO put together a new report on where COVID started. And boy, is it a big pile of garbage. So the new report claims that COVID could have come from an animal. That's basically what it's saying. It probably came from an animal, but it could have also come from the Wuhan lab, but we're not really sure. So this is the preliminary report for the Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens. And if we scroll through this, you can actually see a little bit deeper here. They actually point out that there's no animal to human evidence, they point out in this report. No animal to human evidence. And they say is this paragraph. At the present time, currently available epidemiological and sequencing data suggests ancestral strains to SARS-CoV-2 have a zoonotic origin, with the closest genetically related viruses being beta coronaviruses identified in bats. I don't know how to say that. Rhinolophosis bats in China and Laos in 2020. So not even in 2020 or 2019 in China. However, so far, neither the virus progenitors nor the natural intermediate host or spillover event to humans have been identified.
Which is interesting, right? Because the World Health Organization has been complaining all along that Wuhan did not give them access to their labs. They only handed out data, and they asked for further data, and China said, no, this is basically all you're getting, right? So they felt comfortable to publish this report full of question marks, and we, the recipients of it, know that they didn't have full access to the sources they wanted to write it.
Right. So we can't figure it out. We have no idea, but it came from an animal, sure. And it also, but it didn't transmit to a human from our report. So you're full of garbage. But maybe NBC News actually, I think, here's NBC News. Where did this idea come from? Because NBC News actually had an idea about this and evidence. Here's NBC, watch.
Tonight, NBC News confirms a US intelligence report says 3 researchers at a Wuhan lab fell ill and even went to the hospital right before the coronavirus pandemic began. There's been growing speculation the virus escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but an earlier joint study by the WHO in China controversially dismissed claims the virus may have leaked from that lab. But back in March, a member of that team told us some lab researchers were ill.
Did some researchers get sick with flu-like symptoms in the fall of 2019?
There were occasional illness because that's normal. There was nothing that stood out.
Oh, there was nothing that stood out. It was normal. This was normal. This is what happens in labs where normally people get infected with the stuff they're working on. Like this is what happened in this lab. Science writer Nicholas Wade wrote an article in which he concluded that evidence around the origins of COVID-19 is fairly firmly in favor of the virus coming from the lab in Wuhan. Here's Nicholas Wade.
Of all the places in China it could have broken out, is Wuhan at the doorstep of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And this seems to be hardly a
debate. Yes, that's where it fell. And by the way, a Canadian military officer who fears that he was at ground zero of COVID 2 months before China officially acknowledged the virus has demanded an investigation into the suspicious outbreak of the illness there. Look at this. Long-serving officer who cannot be named as he's still in the forces was among the scores of athletes who fell sick with a debilitating illness after attending the World Military Games in Wuhan in October 2019. What's more, thanks to WikiLeaks, we learned through Hillary Clinton's State Department emails from WikiLeaks that she was concerned about the Wuhan lab and that they were engineering biological weapons. The State Department cables from June 2009 obtained by WikiLeaks reveal that Clinton warned France that gain-of-function activities at the Wuhan lab could cause biological weapons proliferation concern. And then here is Hillary, right, a little while later, in March 2021. This week, I spoke to Senator Duckworth about the recent rise in anti-Asian bigotry fueled by Donald Trump's racist rhetoric, her own experiences with prejudice, and what we can all do to stop the Asian hate. Here's the cover, and then, just to kind of put a button on this, here's the cover of The Atlantic, because this is continuing to happen. So here's the new Atlantic piece. Scientists are creating new incurable diseases in labs. Is that reasonable? Can you even believe that they even would write this question?
The question, is it reasonable?
Is it reasonable? They're creating new and dangerous viruses in labs. Is it reasonable? No, the answer is not. It's not reasonable. When it killed millions of people, when it just killed millions of people and came from this lab. So this WHO report is a total whitewashing of factual data and evidence that's widely available.
And I'm just wondering if they think that's it. That's it.
Yeah, we're
done now.
Here. We're not going to do anything.
Move on, everybody.
Yeah, we're not going to have any further reports on this. We don't know. Basically, we know that it could have come from animals, but probably not. And there's no evidence at all of it jumping from that animal to a human. And then you have all of this overwhelming evidence of people who were at those military games who suddenly saw all of these crazy things happening in that town as a result of the leaks from the labs. And the evidence that we just talked about that NBC News even covered. And by the way, it's pretty interesting. I'm no NBC News fan, as you know. I've done a whole story about their smears of independent journalists, right? But you want to think for a second here about this, the context of NBC actually doing a story on this right at the exact same time that they were having to curry favor with the Chinese government to do the NBC Olympics in China, right? Pretty interesting that they... And you can disagree with me about this. I just think it's interesting that they did this story. The story that was published was prior to the Olympic Games. So not something that NBC would want to do to stir the pot there in China about that. But I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
Yes, it's interesting, but it's also interesting because it's not interesting, because they sort of say, well, we can't be sure, human to human contact, not so sure, right? And so that opens the door for okay, do some science on that.
Right.
Animal to human, not so sure. And so again, there are ways to continue to follow this trail, but not if they have no access to data, which, I guess we're all deciding is acceptable.
Yeah, they don't. I guess all the data that we've seen and all the evidence that's out there among other scientists and researchers, the WHO just doesn't have access to it.
Which, it's important to know what the origin of COVID is so that we don't have another one. Nobody wants that.
Right.
Maybe certain governments want that, but most humans do not want this. And so I don't know, but is this an indication that since the World Health Organization puts out this report and they're like, okay, this is what we think, we're done with this now. My sort of selfish question is, can I be done with it now too then? Do I have to still wear a mask in a doctor's office or, if you can move on, can I?
Thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. We've been banned, we've been blocked, we've been censored. That's why we started our own website, to stay connected with you for free.
That's right. So head on over to redacted.inc and make sure you're connected with us. You can sign up again at redacted.inc, not .com.